Hello and welcome everybody to this very special interview. Today I am with Laura Summers. And if you don't know me, I'm Matilda Lerge. I'm a healer and I work among other things with the children. And recently I stumbled over Laura Summers' podcast she made over a year ago, I think. But they were really talking to my heart. They were called what are they called, Laura?
Celebrating, yeah.
And connecting to the heart of a child with autism. And I really feel like me and Laura could have a very exciting conversation about how it is to be the mother of a very special child. So I asked if Laura wanted to speak to me today, and she said yes. And here we are. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a bit about yourself? Who is Laura Summers among being the mother of a child with autism?
I am a lifetime educator. I actually didn't know that autism existed until I was working on my dissertation, and I was coaching students that were twice exceptional, which means they had in part of their IQ tests, they were testing very high in certain subject areas. And then in other areas, they had challenges that were making it difficult to complete school. So there were about 30 students that were part of this high school within a high school. And we were working with them to keep them from dropping out of school. And so it was truly a case of, in our case in America, public education failing the student. And so my heart went out to them. I had no idea, really from a training perspective, what they needed. But I knew that if I talked with them through my heart, that I would be able to connect with them and create a successful pathway for them so that they could graduate. And it ended up being just such an opening experience for me. And then obviously, the synchronicity of it is I figured out, oh, this might be what's happening with my son. And that led to further testing, et cetera. And that's how I have come to talk about my child with autism, who's now a grown adult. And the message that I've been wanting to focus on is really the gifts that they bring, because it has been a journey. And I think it's so important that we celebrate who they are as a whole being and not focus on the diagnosis, for example.
Yeah. So you actually met it in your professional life and started working with your son's name is David, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how old was David when you started working with those students?
David was around 7 years old, and so we had been noticing some delay in language, some tendencies to really pull within and not be exhibiting like normal, what's considered normal social interactions. But we had in testing to that point, it had been determined that he had what's sensory integration disorder. So it was really about the senses. And so through the traditional occupational therapy and speech therapy, et cetera, we were trying to work with it that way. And it wasn't until I was working with these students that I realized it went even deeper than that. And so knowing that this is a journey as his parents, we immediately, and being an educator, I immediately went to what was published. I went to research. I went to some mainstream publications to try to figure out what to do, because there is initially this sense of panic, like, oh no, there's something wrong with my child, and what do I do about this so that he can be successful in our world? And I feel like that was a natural response, but it was when I paused and stepped back and really fell into the situation, knowing with my full being that he was a gift just as he was, and that it wasn't about what we were reading in books, but that it was really about really tuning into him and sensing what it is that he needed from us. And what he really needed was unconditional love, which is what we all need.
Yeah. So going back a little, how was the first years when you just got David? I know you have an older daughter. How was the first time with him just after he was born?
Yeah, after he was born, we didn't know anything was, and I don't even want to say wrong, because that once again is going to the general stereotype that autism is a disability, where I actually feel like these children are coming into this time to show us they're so sensitive to the environment. They're so sensitive to everything that's around us. And so at the time, we just thought he was who he is. And we thought his older sister, who is very verbal, was speaking for him. So we just, not knowing any better, I was 27 when David was born. And, you know, some would find that quite young. But I just thought, oh, this is just how he is. And so we didn't realize that he was delayed in speech, or that it was considered wrong that he didn't crawl. He went right to walking. He avoided crawling because of the sensation of being on the ground. And he didn't like certain clothes, you know, that feel of them, and he wasn't talking. And so it wasn't until we tried to take him to preschool, and his preschool teacher pulled us aside and said, there's something wrong here. And that just broke my heart, because I was like, oh, if we would have caught it sooner, because research is showing that if you intervene earlier, as early as 18 months, you can actually do some proactive therapies that will help them integrate into society. But we just at that point went with it, and you know, still tried to approach it from, it's all going to work out. That just tends to be how I look at life, is, you know, life happens for us, not to us, and that we were meant to be his parents, and that we were meant to be on this journey with him, and that he was teaching us just as much as we were teaching him. So really, I feel, and I think that's okay to stay here in this presence, that it really was a spiritual connection of souls deciding before his birth, before, you know, who knows when, but that we were connected and that we were going to be on this journey together. And so that was really, for me, really took the pressure off. There's a lot of pressure when your child is diagnosed with a disability. Yeah. And there's a sense of failure, like, what did I do wrong? And shame, and all these emotions come in. And so it was really processing through those emotions, which I have to admit, they still come up sometimes. Even he is now 25 years old, and the emotions still come up, and it's that pausing and going within to recognize, okay, what's coming up to be healed.
Yeah. So what you saw early on was like an extra sensitivity, and he was more introverted, and then you were just allowing him to be him. But has this changed over the years? I know that spirituality is something that, or the way of like observing more than acting and feeling energy and accepting, is something that you explain is like a part of the journey. Like in the beginning, there is a lot of judgment, self-judgment in it, and thinking that you can do something. Has it made it easier to be the mother of a special child, to just getting to know yourself more and know your own way of accepting yourself?
Yes. I definitely feel that the initial reaction is to fix. We feel like we have to fix. Yeah. We have to fix what he's doing. We have to fix how he responds. For example, he stems, which means he's putting his hands in front of his face. And when he's excited, he does this. And there would be other children and parents who would see him. We like to travel quite a bit, and so we would take him to the ocean, and he'd be so excited about seeing the ocean that he'd immediately go into that mannerism. And so we would be like, stop that, you can't do that in public. And we would try to get him to stop early on because we didn't know any better. Where actually that was his way of, he has such this flood of emotion and such this connection with the beauty and the joy. And so he was just, that was his way of kind of tuning in and being able to handle the flood of feelings that he was feeling. And so after a while, as I became more aware, I stopped asking him to stop. And even now, as a 25-year-old, at times he does still stem, and I no longer question it. I find that because I'm not questioning it, it's not as noticeable. Maybe it's not as, maybe it's noticeable to someone else, but it's not as noticeable to me, because it no longer matters. I'm not trying to fix it, because now I see it as, just as I'm talking with my hands, I see it as an expression of who he is. And he's such a beautiful soul. He cares so much about other people. So that's another misconception about autism, is I was told how uncaring they were, and that they didn't care about other people, and that they didn't know when they hurt someone. That's not true. And maybe that's characteristics of some people, but by allowing him to be his true self, he shows up in the world in a far gentler and more unconditional loving way than anyone I know. He is currently a bus driver for our city. And so he works with a very diverse population. And the way he treats each person that enters his bus with the same compassion and the same understanding that his service to them is that he is transporting them from one place to another, to the point that if a high school student, for example, who's taking the bus to school doesn't have the right fare, can't pay, he's like, it's okay, you can get on my bus. Yeah. And that means so much to me as my son. I'm so proud of him, because he teaches me through that, of how accepting we need to be of each other. And I think that's just a really, like I said, it's an important lesson and a good reminder for myself.
So beautiful. But going back a little again, I wanted to know, like, how was it with your family, within your own family, to have a child with autism? And how was it, like, you mentioned a bit about it, like when you were out in public, that there were certain things you didn't want him to do early on, but also how with, like, your broader family, your mom, how was it? Did they understand what was going on? Did they understand him and you and your choices?
No, yeah, I mean, that still brings up some emotion, obviously. This was a new experience for our immediate family as well as our extended family. And so it took a lot of explaining. And because we didn't know a lot, it was sometimes challenging to put it into words, what it meant and why he reacted the way he did. So it was with careful just explanation to explain that he wasn't intentionally not making eye contact, that, he really was listening, when we talked to him, and that if we insisted he made eye contact, if we demanded that, then that turned him off. That made him go inside, because that was such a friction within his system. He still was held to, we still had boundaries for him. There is, in terms of being out in public, with any child, we were, if we were having dinner out in a restaurant, there is a level of volume that is acceptable. And we felt like if he all of a sudden got angry and had an outburst, that was removing him from the situation, and taking him into a quiet place so that he could calm down. So there were boundaries, and I think that was important to address. And at the same time, explaining to those around us, friends and family, that rather than expecting him to participate, if he had the need to go away because the stimulus was too much, that was okay, that they weren't doing anything wrong. We have a very close friend who would watch him in the morning and after school, because my husband and I were both educators and were at work. And she found that as soon as she stopped, and I talk about this in my podcast, as soon as she stopped like doing what the research book said and just kind of watched him and saw what the flow was for him, things got immediately better. The kids around were less stressful. He was less stressful. And he would choose when to come back into the conversation. But I think the biggest piece with family is that there is a sense of, oh, what am I doing wrong as a parent? Where have I failed? And I think it's just knowing that it's not that you failed. You have been given this special assignment to be on this journey, to be on this path with this soul. And, you know, that's been, it kind of takes the pressure off. And continuing, like I said, you know, still holding boundaries and also still pushing. There's a lot of times where people will concede then and say, well, you know, we were told oftentimes that he wouldn't graduate, or that if he did graduate, it would take a lot longer. And we were like, no, we don't think that's the case. We know him. He's a lot smarter than you realize. He has a lot going on up here. He just didn't know how to process it out. And so through his educational journey, we were able to continue to push against the traditional trajectory and trust and have faith in our own confidence that he was going to be okay because he had us as parents. So I do think it takes that inner faith, that it takes that inner just knowing. And I'm not saying you know that 24 hours a day. We all have our moments. But it was continuing to communicate to our family that, yeah, this is hard, but let's talk through this. What is this bringing up for you? Where is this bringing up feelings to heal? Where is this bringing up expectations of how we think children should behave or learn? You know, and I really, to this day, commend his sister, because she was such a good sister for him. And I did share early on with her that she was chosen to be his sister. And she always protected him. And I know that put a lot of pressure on her. But I also know that it softened her in ways that she may not have otherwise have been softened, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What I hear you say is it's a journey into really self-acceptance and self-trust.
Yes.
And what is really challenging is letting go of the self-judgment, because what we don't realize is how much of our behavior that is really based on judging anything else. And that's also why, in my experience, that many get frustrated with a child that behaves differently, is because we learn that a certain way of behaving is polite, is nice, is loving. So we don't see that there can be another way of showing love. And what I hear from many that have a special child is that they're like the journey into opening their heart and just really accepting themselves and
Yes.
and their child.
Yeah, there was a you know, I came from a family that was very achievement oriented, and it was about accomplishments. It was about going to college. It was about being all that you could be in the outside world. And I really had to step back from that and let go of, I'm going to use the word traditional again because I don't have another word to use, but that those traditional expectations, where as soon as we let go of the expectations and realize that as long as David was happy, as long as that he was able to take care of himself and have what he felt was a fulfilling life, that's all that mattered. You know, he tried, for example, he tried technical college for 3 months. And he was really good at the hands-on part, but he wasn't able to focus in studies, in book studies, in a dorm with 3 other 18-year-olds. It just wasn't the right setup for him. And yet it was so powerful, because when he went away to this college, it was really that, for me, it was the cutting of the apron strings. It was me telling him, saying to him, I am confident that you can be out in the world, and that, I'm kind of I have that image of the mother bird letting the baby bird fly, and recognizing in myself that my fear, my overprotection needed to be let go. I shouldn't overprotect him. I need to let him go out and try things. And when he came home 3 months later, he immediately found a job and took a different path than anyone else in our family had done. And that was okay. And I think it was a great lesson for my extended family as well, to recognize that, success isn't necessarily, in going to a university. There are other paths, and that is okay. And so it really opened that up for our family. And I think that's really important to mention, that, there are many different paths, and success is really an inner journey.
Yes. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that in your podcast, that thing about you realizing that David was happy, and that he was living, that he found that his life was a success. And that was what mattered. But that you can, I remember writing to you afterward that this had really been a realization for me, like understanding why we want our child to be normal is because we think that is the way to happiness. That is the way they can become happy, the only way. And I know for both you and me, we are on this path where we realize that happiness is the way to be happy, that you can just choose it. And really, these children might be better at getting this. These children might be better at getting this than a lot of us who see and try to fit in and try all these ways of like becoming something in order to become happy.
He just is. It's being. It's that, something that we all have, some of us, I'm going to say all of us, but some of us have really had to accept, is that it's just about being. It's not about doing. And he doesn't have the same expectations that I have had. And thank goodness, he doesn't know that, we know when we're missing something, like in terms of a social interaction, we can sense that, and it feels uncomfortable. But for him, because he didn't expect it, because he came into the situation with no expectation, he's just happy. He's just happy to have a social interaction, because he doesn't know any different. And I know that maybe that sounds really naive, but no, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And valuing that over living up to some standards.
Yes.
Because living up to the standard is an old way of feeling safe.
Exactly. Very, very much, if we talk about third dimensional, being human, it's.
So one thing I would like to know before, I have two more things before we end this interview. One thing is, there might be some parents to young children with autism watching this, and I wondered, so just for the sake of that, I know you won't go back and change anything, but if you could go back and change something from early on, keeping this in mind, that is an advice for parents having children with autism, what would you change? Or is there anything you would change?
I think in terms of change, it's more of what I would change about myself, and not change about him. Change how I reacted. Change that I did listen to others, and when I really had the answers within. So I think we have to be confident as parents to trust our gut, to trust our heart. That, we know our children better than anyone else does, and that, yes, it's okay to seek, outside assistance, especially from someone like you who understands the whole child, who really can sense the relationship. And even in that is that if someone says something to you that doesn't resonate, you don't have to accept it. You don't have to buy into that. You know, like I said, within his own educational system, we had teachers that didn't support him, and that didn't feel right. And so we would seek out other teachers that did support him. And I think that's really important to know that as a parent, you know, it is okay to listen to your inner knowing, even if you don't have that background, that training.
Yeah.
You know, because that only goes so deep. And every child is unique, and that's wonderful. That's what we want. It's not about putting them in a box, but it's also allowing them to fly. It's allowing them to be all that they are here to be. And by continuing to gently push within his range, that allowed him to become that. We weren't, and maybe this is going to come back down as it's going to sound like I'm judging, and I'm not, because we're all on our own path. But it's really important for me to say that it's okay to take risks, and that you don't have to overly protect, even though that's our first tendency to do so. A prime example is our David was very afraid of loud noises. And so the first reaction is to keep him away from loud noises. And instead, and this was like going to, we celebrate, you know, Independence Day, 4th of July here in America. And he was afraid of the fireworks. So we found a way as a family to still celebrate and still watch the fireworks, but at a distance that he was comfortable, at a distance where the noise didn't bother him. Or we would put headphones in. And so by doing that, we're protecting him, we're allowing him to feel safe, but we're still giving him that experience. So now, as he grew, he's okay. He's no longer obviously afraid of the noise of fireworks, because he can understand them. He can understand the context of them. So I don't know if that makes sense, or if you need to, you can articulate it better than what I'm saying.
No, I think it's beautiful. Yeah, to just allow yourself to have those experiences with them, and them to have those experiences as well, in a way where they're not getting scared or triggered in an overly damaging way. Just like, I guess it's habituation in a way.
And being kind to yourself as a parent, or as an educator, or as, you know, a friend of someone that with autism, because it's being kind to yourself and knowing you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah. Allow yourself to explore what is possible within this. Yeah, that's amazing. One last thing, I want to share an experience I had recently with you, and then I want to hear something from you. So normally when I'm with children with autism, it's in a session. So they're far away and I do a remote session. So I only connect with them energetically, which is also an amazing experience because I can feel the whole energy system. But recently I had the joy of spending time with a small girl with autism. And she was in her own world. It was beautiful, but I could feel like every time I was close to her, I could feel her energy, feel very clearly, like, and that it was different to mine. So I wanted to just feel a bit into it. What is going on here? And then I felt, and I could feel it, plenty of energy, like this really, really strong energy. So I was like, whoa, okay. And then I could feel just behind her this big angel standing just behind her. And immediately I got so touched. I had tears in my eyes and was like a bit like, whoa, okay. Stepping back a little here. But I could just feel the overwhelming love there was for her, and the protection of her energy. Not protection in like protection from other people, but just like conserving her energy, because it was so important here on earth right now. So I thought it was such a beautiful experience. And I haven't had an experience like this before, because normally I don't go in the field, but it just felt so different. I got curious, like what is going on here? And this really made an impression. I could feel the importance in bringing her abilities to earth. And what I wanted to know is, when you think about David, what are the traits, his abilities that you, in your perspective, that are so important right now here on earth?
I would go back to that saying, that open-heartedness. Yeah. The very thing that I have desired to be, and knowing that I have at times closed my heart, he naturally is. You know, he is protected by his angels. And, you know, I see that, and he's able to project this unconditional love to anyone he meets. And there's this innocence in that. And knowing that is then energetically being shared with anyone that he comes into contact with, he's healing. He's just naturally healing. And that's so amazing and so beautiful. And I'm so glad that he has his angels around him to protect him, because not everyone will understand that. And so it's just so nice to know that I don't have to worry about him.
No. Yeah. And it is not a mistake that they come here.
No, it's not.
It's not a mistake.
No. And I feel so fortunate to have.
Yeah. I think that's so amazing. Well, thank you, Laura. Is there something you want to say just before we wrap up, or do you think we covered it all?
Well, there's always, like I said, life's a journey. So I don't think we covered it all.
10 years and you can talk about
but I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions, when you post this or whatever. And then
I will include some contact details about you below in this video, so people can contact you if they have any questions.
And they're more than welcome to go to my website and look at, I have 2 podcasts available right now. More to come. So then,
say the name of the.
Sure, it's www.laura LAURA Summers SUMMERS, like the season, .com. So lauraleesummers.com is where they'll find the podcasts.
Yes, that's so great. Well, thank you so much for wanting to talk to me today, and I just wish you and David and the rest of the family all the best.
Thank you so much for this time.